You're wasting your life with this art nonsense. Real careers make money." My father's words sliced through the Sunday dinner air like a knife. I looked up from my plate, stunned into silence as my siblings exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mom avoided my eyes, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on her napkin. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." "I'm doing what I love," I finally managed, my voice smaller than I wanted. Dad snorted, turning to my brother. "James, tell your sister what you made last quarter at the firm." James shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, that's not—" "Tell her," Dad insisted. "Around $85,000, James muttered. Dad's triumphant smile cut deep. "And what did your little drawings make you, Olivia? Enough to cover rent on that shoebox apartment?" I'd been preparing for this moment since I'd decided to pursue illustration full-time 6 months ago. I had rehearsed confident responses, prepared evidence of successful artists, practiced standing my ground. But sitting at my childhood dining table, surrounded by the people who should have believed in me most, words failed me. "That's what I thought," Dad continued, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "When you're ready to grow up and get a real job, let me know. Though with that art degree, good luck finding anything worthwhile." Mom finally spoke, her gentle tone somehow worse than Dad's outright dismissal. "Honey, we just worry about you. We don't want you struggling forever." My sister Natalie, always the peacemaker, jumped in. "Liv's artwork is beautiful, though. Maybe she could do it as a hobby while working in marketing or something?" The suggestion hung in the air like a compromise everyone but me found reasonable. "I'm not looking for a fallback plan," I said, finding my voice. "I believe in what I'm doing." Dad laughed, actually laughed, and the sound hollowed me out. "Belief doesn't pay bills, Olivia. Look at your cousins, all established in proper careers. Meanwhile, you're approaching 30 with nothing to show for it but some doodles." "They're not doodles," I said, my fingers tightening around my fork. "I've been commissioned for 3 book covers this month. And what did that earn you? Pocket change?" Dad shook his head. "You'll always be poor chasing this fantasy. Always struggling, always behind." The words landed like a physical blow. 5 years of art school, 2 years building a portfolio, while working retail, and 6 months of slowly growing my freelance business, all dismissed as childish fantasy. I looked around the table at my family. Dad, the successful surgeon who measured life in salary figures and status. Mom, who had given up her own dreams of writing to support his career. James, following perfectly in Dad's footsteps. Natalie, who had compromised on becoming a pharmaceutical sales rep instead of pursuing research because it was more practical. They were comfortable, secure, and completely afraid of pursuing anything without guaranteed success. "I should go," I said quietly, placing my napkin beside my half-eaten meal. "Olivia, don't be dramatic," Mom sighed. "Your father is just concerned." "No, he's not concerned. He's judgmental," I replied, standing up. "And I don't need to sit here and be told I'm wasting my life." Dad barely looked up from his plate. "When reality hits and you're struggling to make rent, don't come looking for handouts." I paused at the doorway, a strange calm settling over me. "I won't." Those 2 words felt like a vow, not just to them, but to myself. Walking down the tree-lined suburban street away from my childhood home, I felt simultaneously hollowed out, and somehow lighter. The beautiful houses with manicured lawns had once represented success to me. Now they looked like prisons of conformity. Back in my small apartment on the edge of Providence, I surveyed my living space with new eyes. It was modest, a converted industrial loft with concrete floors and exposed pipes. But it was also mine. The walls were covered with my illustrations, the table scattered with drawing tablets, ink pens, and watercolors. Large windows let in natural light that transformed the space throughout the day. Was it luxurious? No, but it was alive in a way my parents' carefully decorated home never felt. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at my portfolio website. 5-star reviews from clients. A slowly growing Instagram following. 3 pending book cover commissions that, while not making me rich, were paying my bills this month. My phone buzzed with texts from Natalie. Dad didn't mean it, and he's just old-fashioned, and please don't be upset. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a new document and began calculating exactly what I needed to prove them wrong. Average. Successful illustrator income, $62,000. Current income, $28,000. Gap, $34,000. I created columns. Digital illustrations, book covers, commercial work, courses and workshops, passive income products. For each category, I listed potential clients, projects, and revenue streams. I researched pricing, structures, studied successful illustrators' business models, and mapped out monthly targets. By 3 a.m., I had created not just a plan, but a mission. My father thought I'd always be poor. I would prove him wrong, not by giving up my art, but by turning it into something bigger than he could imagine. The next morning, I woke up with purpose, burning in my chest and a strategy laid out before me. First step, scale beyond one-off commissions. I spent the next week creating a collection of digital illustration packs, themed sets of artwork that brands, bloggers, and small businesses could license for their content. It took 14-hour days, but by the following Monday, I had 5 complete collections ready to sell. Setting up the online shop was next. I'd been putting it off, intimidated by the technical aspects, but now I worked through tutorials, sorting out payment processing, licensing terms, and digital delivery. When I finally hit publish, my finger hovered over the mouse. What if nobody bought them? What if Dad was right? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I clicked anyway. The first sale came at 2:17 a.m. I was still awake, obsessively refreshing the page, when the notification appeared. Someone in Australia had purchased my botanical illustration pack for $49. One sale became 3 by morning. By the end of the week, I'd made $620 from the digital packs alone. Passive income that required no additional work from me. It wasn't financial freedom, but it was validation. A proof of concept. For the next 3 months, I barely existed outside my work. I declined family dinners, ignoring the increasingly concerned messages from my mother and sister. I wasn't ready to face them, not until I had something undeniable to show. I expanded the digital shop, adding new collections every 2 weeks. I cold-emailed art directors at publishing houses with my portfolio. I reached out to former classmates who'd gone the practical route into corporate jobs, offering illustration services for their marketing materials. Most emails went unanswered. Most cold calls led nowhere. But some connected. A small publishing house specializing in fantasy novels hired me for a series of covers. A startup founder commissioned custom illustrations for their pitch deck. A lifestyle blogger licensed my seasonal collections for her content calendar. Each small win built momentum. Each client led to referrals. 4 months after that disastrous family dinner, I landed my first major commercial contract, creating a series of illustrated guides for a kitchenware brand expanding into the European market. The project fee, $14,000. I stared at the contract, in disbelief. This single project was half my previous year's income. That night I allowed myself to celebrate. I ordered takeout from the expensive Thai place I usually couldn't afford and opened a bottle of wine. Sitting cross-legged on my apartment floor, I scrolled through my financial tracking spreadsheet. In just 4 months, I'd tripled my monthly income. I wasn't rich by any means, but I was no longer just scraping by. For the first time since leaving my retail job, I had money left over at the end of the month. A text from James interrupted my celebration. Parents' anniversary dinner. Next weekend? Mom really wants you there. Please come? I hesitated. I wasn't ready. Not yet. But avoiding them forever wasn't the answer either. I'll be there, I replied. The week before the anniversary dinner, I poured myself into preparation, not by rehearsing defenses of my career, but by finalizing a major project. An illustrated children's book about a young girl who dreams of becoming an astronaut, despite everyone telling her it's impossible. The parallel wasn't subtle, but the story had poured out of me in a creative rush that felt almost therapeutic. I'd submitted it to a dozen publishers, expecting months of waiting and likely rejection. What I hadn't expected was an email from Bright Star Publishing expressing immediate interest, requesting a meeting the day before my parents' anniversary dinner. The editor, Monica Chan, was warm but direct. We love the concept, and your illustration style is exactly what we've been looking for. We'd like to offer you a contract for this book, with potential for a series if it performs well. I tried to maintain professional composure as she outlined the terms, $20,000 advance against royalties, with additional earnings if the book succeeded. Do you have any questions? Monica asked after explaining the details. Only one that mattered. When can I sign? I left the publisher's office with a signed contract and a surreal sense of validation. Walking through downtown Providence, I felt weightless, like the city itself had transformed around me. The next evening, I arrived at my parents' anniversary dinner with the contract tucked into my bag. I wasn't planning to wave it in their faces, but having it with me felt like armor. The upscale Italian restaurant was my father's favorite, all dark wood, white tablecloths, and waiters in formal attire. I spotted my family at a corner table, already seated. Taking a deep breath, I approached. Olivia! Mom stood up, embracing me tightly. We've missed you. Dad offered a stiff nod. James and Natalie gave encouraging smiles. Their partners, James's, wife Emma and Natalie's husband Chris, greeted me warmly, having been spared most of the family drama. I settled into the empty chair, acutely aware of my father's evaluating gaze. I'd dressed carefully in a simple black dress that projected professionalism rather than the casual style I typically preferred. You look well, Dad said, which from him was practically effusive. Thanks. I am well, I replied, unfolding my napkin onto my lap. Conversation flowed around me. James's upcoming partnership consideration, Natalie's new house in the suburbs, Mom's garden club achievements. Normal family topics that carefully sidestepped any mention of my career. Until dessert. So, Dad said during a lull in conversation, swirling his scotch. Are you still doing the illustration thing, or have you found something more substantial? The table went quiet. Mom shot him a warning look. 6 months ago, that question would have deflated me. Now I met his gaze steadily. Actually, yes. I'm still illustrating. Business has been good. Dad raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. Good enough to pay the bills? Robert, Mom hissed. Not tonight. It's fine, Mom, I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. Yes, Dad. Good enough to pay the bills, with plenty left over. I've expanded beyond freelancing. I have digital products, commercial contracts, and... I paused, allowing myself this moment of pride. I just signed a book deal yesterday. Natalie gasped. Liv, that's amazing. Dad's expression remained unchanged. A book deal? With who? Bright Star Publishing. It's for a children's book I wrote and illustrated. There's potential for it to become a series. Bright Star? James looked impressed. They're legitimate. They publish that bedtime. Book Emma and I read to the twins. Dad set down his glass. And what does a deal like that pay exactly? Robert, Mom exclaimed. It's a fair question, Dad defended. We're talking about Olivia's financial stability. I considered deflecting, but decided against it. The advance is $20,000, plus royalties if it sells well. That's just for this first book. I've also got a $14,000 commercial illustration contract I'm working on, and my digital products bring in around $3,000 monthly now. I didn't mention that these figures were new developments or that much of my income would go toward catching up on retirement savings I'd neglected. The specifics weren't the point. Dad's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Surprise, perhaps. Or recalculation. That's more substantial than I expected, he admitted. It turns out people will pay quite well for doodles if they're good enough, I said, unable to resist the small dig. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Mom, ever the peacemaker, raised her glass. Well, I think we should toast to Olivia's success and our anniversary. 30 years together and wonderful children to show for it. Glasses clinked. Conversation resumed. The moment passed without the vindication I'd imagined, but perhaps with something more valuable, a subtle shift in how my family saw me. After dinner, as we waited for the valet to bring our cars, Dad approached me. I worry about you, he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. This world is hard on people who don't follow conventional paths. It wasn't an apology, but from my father, it was as close as I might ever get to acknowledgement. I know you worry, I said, but I'm doing well, Dad, really. He nodded stiffly. Good, that's good. It wasn't perfect reconciliation, but it was a beginning. Over the next 18 months, everything accelerated. The children's book, Stella's Stars, exceeded the publisher's expectations, selling enough copies in the first 6 months to trigger discussions about the series they'd mentioned. I signed a 3-book deal with a significantly larger advance. My commercial work expanded beyond illustration into broader design projects. I hired an assistant to help manage the increasing workload and a business manager to handle contracts and finances. I moved from my small loft to a proper studio space with an apartment above it, still in the city, but in a better neighborhood with more space and natural light. My relationship with my family remained complicated, but improved gradually. Mom, came to my first book signing. Natalie proudly displayed Stella's stars in her children's playroom. Even Dad made occasional comments that acknowledged, if not fully embraced, the legitimacy of my career. I was busy, fulfilled, and finally financially secure. The validation I'd sought seemed less important now that I had the satisfaction of building something meaningful on my own terms. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the studio reviewing sketches for Stella's Stars 2 when my phone rang. Seeing Dad's name on the screen was unusual enough to cause concern. "Dad, is everything okay?" His voice sounded strained. "Can you come over for dinner tonight? There's something we need to discuss." "Is Mom all right?" "She's fine. Everyone's fine. We just need to talk. Can you make it?" "Sure. I'll be there at 7. The familiar drive to my parents' suburban home felt strange now. The neighborhoods that had once represented success to me now seemed merely pleasant. Nice, but no longer aspirational. Mom answered the door with a tight smile. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, honey." In the living room, Dad sat in his usual armchair, looking older somehow, more diminished. James was there too, which surprised me. "What's going on?" I asked, declining Mom's offer of tea. Dad and James exchanged glances before Dad cleared his throat. "I've had some financial setbacks," he said, each word seeming to cost him effort. "Significant ones." I looked between them, confused. My father, the meticulous planner, the man who lectured about financial security at every opportunity, having money troubles? "What kind of setbacks?" James leaned forward. Dad invested heavily in a medical technology startup that some colleagues from the hospital were launching. It looked promising. They had patents, prototypes, the works. "They had everything except ethics," Dad interjected bitterly. "The CEO disappeared with most of the investment capital. What he didn't take was consumed by lawsuits." "How much did you lose?" I asked quietly. Dad stared at his hands. "Almost everything. The investments, much of my retirement fund. I even took out a second mortgage on the house." The revelation was stunning. My father, who had built his life around financial security, had gambled it all on a venture that promised greater returns. "We've been helping as much as we can," James said, "but with the twins' private school and our new house." "We're going to have to sell the house," Mom said softly from the doorway. "Your father can continue working, but not at the pace he used to. His hands—" She trailed. "Off." I hadn't noticed before, but looking closer, I could see a slight tremor in my father's right hand. For a surgeon, it was a career death sentence. "What do you need?" I asked. The question hung in the air. Dad looked physically pained, unable to form the words. Mom stepped in. "We hate to ask this, Olivia. We really do. But we need help with the mortgage payments until we can sell the house, just for a few months." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. My father, who had declared I would always be poor, was asking me for financial assistance. I could feel multiple responses rising within me: vindication, resentment, the temptation to remind him of his dismissal of my career choice. But looking at my father, proud, stubborn, now humbled by circumstance, I found those feelings hollow compared to a simpler truth. He was family and he was in trouble. "How much do you need to keep the house until it sells?" I asked. Dad named a figure that would have been impossible for me 2 years ago but was now manageable, not insignificant, but doable. I can help, I said simply. Relief washed over Mom's face. Dad's expression was more complicated, gratitude warring with shame. We'll pay you back, he said stiffly. Every cent. I know you will, I replied. Later, as I prepared to leave, Dad walked me to my car. The spring evening was cool. The neighborhood quiet except for distant lawn sprinklers. I was wrong about your career, he said suddenly, looking straight ahead rather than at me. I didn't understand that world. I still don't, really. Coming from my father, it was as close to an apology as I might ever receive. It's okay, Dad. You wanted security for me. Yes, he agreed. But I was looking for it in the wrong places. Even for myself, apparently. A bitter smile crossed his face. You couldn't have known about the fraud, I offered. No, but I should have diversified. Better. Practiced what I preached. He shook his head. The irony isn't lost on me, you know. You choosing an unconventional path that worked out, while I followed all the rules and still ended up in trouble. We stood in silence for a moment. Thank you, he said finally. Not just for the money. For not throwing my words back at me. I would have deserved it. I thought about the vindication I'd imagined so many times. The fantasy of proving him wrong in some dramatic fashion. The reality was quieter, but somehow more significant. We're family, I said simply. The check I wrote the next day wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about choice. My choice to help despite the past, not because I'd forgotten it. I still had the bank receipt in my desk drawer 3 months later when Stella's Stars won a prestigious children's book award, boosting sales into bestseller territory. The royalty check that followed was substantial enough to make even my father raise his eyebrows in surprise when I mentioned the amount during a family dinner. I never would have guessed children's books could be so lucrative, he admitted. It's not just the books, I explained. It's everything they lead to, the school visits, the merchandise licensing, the animation discussions. Animation? Mom perked up. Like a TV show? Early talks, but yes, a streaming service is interested. Dad shook his head, not in disapproval, but in amazement. I understood medicine, numbers, tangible things. Your world always seemed so uncertain to me. It is uncertain, I acknowledged, but that's also what makes it exciting. I wish I'd understood that sooner, he said quietly. My parents sold their house 2 months later, moving to a smaller but comfortable condo that better suited their new circumstances. Dad took on limited consulting work that accommodated his hand tremor, while Mom finally pursued the writing she'd abandoned decades ago. They paid back my loan in full, though I'd told them repeatedly it wasn't necessary. It's a matter of pride, Dad insisted, handing me a check at Sunday dinner in their new home. What he didn't say, but what I understood, was that the repayment was about more than money. It was his way of restoring balance between us, of acknowledging that I was no longer the child needing guidance, but an adult who had made valid choices, different from his, but valid nonetheless. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the journey of the past 2 years. I hadn't set out to prove my father wrong. I'd simply wanted to pursue work that felt meaningful to me. Yet in following that path, I'd discovered something important. Success wasn't measured by meeting someone else's expectations, but by creating a life that aligned with my own values. My father had learned something too, that security doesn't come from following a prescribed path, but from building adaptability and resilience into whatever path you choose. In my studio the next morning, I began sketching ideas for a new book. Not part of the Stella series, but something different. A story about a parent and child who each learn something valuable from the other's perspective. Looking up at the wall where I'd pinned my old planning document, the one I'd created the night of that painful family dinner, I smiled at how far I'd come. Not just financially, but in confidence and clarity of purpose. I took it down, replaced it with a blank sheet, and began mapping out new goals. Not to prove anything to anyone else, but because I was excited about where my work could go next. The path forward was mine to define. The first months of building my illustration business were brutal. Not just hard, brutal. The kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bones, makes your eyes burn, and has you questioning every life choice at 3 a.m. My tiny apartment became my war room. I pushed my bed against the wall to make space for a proper drawing table I found on Craigslist. The kitchen counter became my packaging station. The bathroom doubled as a photography studio for product shots, with a white shower curtain as my backdrop. Every morning started at 5 a.m. Not because I'm naturally a morning person, I'm decidedly not, but because early client calls in Europe required it. I'd gulp down coffee, splash water on my face, and try to sound professionally awake, while discussing illustration briefs with publishing houses in London or Berlin. Daytime hours were for creating. Nighttime was for business development, researching potential clients, updating my portfolio, writing pitch emails, managing my fledgling online store. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. You can't sustain this, warned my friend Eliza over our rare lunch meetup, 6 weeks into my new regime. She pushed her salad around, watching me wolf down my sandwich while simultaneously responding to client emails. You look exhausted. I'm fine, I insisted, not looking up from my phone. This is just the hustle stage. Everyone goes through it. The hustle stage shouldn't kill you, she countered. You need systems, boundaries, maybe an assistant? I laughed at that. With what money? I'm barely covering rent. But Eliza wasn't entirely wrong. My system consisted of post-it notes covering my walls, scattered email folders, and an increasingly unreliable memory. I was dropping balls, forgetting to follow up with potential clients, missing deadlines for my online store updates, sleeping through alarms. The breaking point came 2 months in, when I mixed up delivery addresses for 2 different clients and sent confidential concept art for a major book cover to the wrong publishing house. The ensuing panic and profuse apologies cost me a day of work and nearly cost me the client. That night, I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by scattered drawings, unpaid bills, and cold takeout I'd forgotten to eat. Something had to change. I couldn't afford help, but I could build better systems. I spent an entire weekend researching project management tools, setting up customer relationship management software, and creating templates for everything from client onboarding to invoice tracking. I invested in scheduling software that automatically converted time zones and sent meeting reminders. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. You're not just an artist anymore, I reminded myself, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. You're running a business. The realization was both terrifying and empowering. I'd spent years developing my artistic skills but had given almost no thought to entrepreneurship. Now I needed both. I started dedicating Sunday afternoons to business education, online courses about pricing strategies, marketing for creative professionals, and financial management for freelancers. I joined forums where illustrators shared insights about contracts and client relations. I studied successful artists' business models, taking note of their multiple revenue streams. Slowly, incrementally, things began to improve. The digital products in my online shop provided a trickle of passive income, not enough to live on, but enough to create breathing room. A children's book publisher who liked my portfolio assigned me a small project illustrating chapter headers. A local coffee shop commissioned me to design their seasonal menu boards. None of these jobs were dream projects. None made me rich. But together, they kept the lights on and built my portfolio. 3 months in, I received an email that would change everything, though I didn't recognize its importance at first. Subject: Seeking Illustrator for Environmental Education Series. The message was from Green Sprout Publishing, a small press focusing on environmental education materials for children. They needed an illustrator for a 4-book series about endangered ecosystems. The budget was modest but fair, the timeline reasonable, and the creative brief aligned perfectly with my style. What made this project different wasn't the money, it was the challenge. Each book required over 50 detailed illustrations depicting complex ecosystems, from coral reefs to rainforests, with scientifically accurate renderings of plants and animals. I almost declined, doubting my ability to handle such specialized content. But something stopped me. This was exactly the kind of meaningful work I'd dreamed of when choosing this career. Art that educated, that mattered. I spent 3 days researching before responding, studying reference photos of rainforest canopies and deep-sea creatures, sketching sample concepts, and creating a detailed project plan. My proposal to Green Sprout wasn't just professional, it was passionate. I outlined not only how I would approach the illustrations, but why I cared about the project. I included sample sketches showing how I would make scientific accuracy engaging for young readers. The publisher called me the next day. "We had 20 applicants for this project," said Mira, the editorial director. "Many with more experience in educational publishing. But your proposal showed not just talent, but understanding of our mission. When can you start?" The Green Sprout series became my anchor project, steady work that provided reliable income, while I built other aspects of my business. The publisher's trust gave me confidence, the regular deadlines imposed discipline, and the creative challenges pushed my skills in new directions. But the true value of the project emerged in unexpected ways. First came expertise. Researching coral reefs and rainforests for accurate illustrations transformed me from a generalist into a specialist with knowledge in environmental and science illustration, a niche with less competition and higher rates than general commercial work. Then came visibility. When the first book in the series, Coral Kingdom, was published, it received attention from environmental education circles. Teachers shared it on social media. Environmental nonprofits recommended it in newsletters. My name, listed prominently as illustrator, began circulating in spaces I hadn't previously accessed. An unexpected email arrived 6 months after Coral Kingdom hit shelves. Subject: Illustration. Request: World Wildlife Fund. The message was brief but momentous. The World Wildlife Fund was producing a campaign about ocean conservation and wanted to discuss commissioning illustrations based on my work in Coral Kingdom. I read the email 4 times before believing it was real. The World Wildlife Fund, a major international organization with millions of supporters, had noticed my work and sought me out specifically. The resulting project, creating a series of illustrations for their digital campaign, paid more than all my previous jobs combined. But the real value wasn't the money. It was the credibility. The WWF logo in my client list opened doors that had previously been firmly closed. Suddenly, other environmental organizations reached out. A marine research institute commissioned illustrations for their annual report. A conservation technology startup wanted artwork for their pitch deck. Without planning it, I had become known for something specific: translating complex environmental information into accessible, emotionally resonant visuals. The specialist path came with unexpected benefits: higher rates, less competition, more meaningful projects, clients who valued expertise over bargain prices. As my bank account slowly recovered from the early months of financial strain, I allowed myself one significant investment: a high-end tablet with advanced pressure sensitivity that drastically improved my digital workflow. The purchase felt simultaneously terrifying and affirming, a concrete acknowledgement that this wasn't a temporary endeavor, but a legitimate career worth investing in. My calendar filled with projects that aligned with my values while building my reputation. But there was still one project I'd been quietly developing in the background, a personal project that combined everything I was passionate about. Wonder Homes had started as a simple concept: an illustrated children's book about animal habitats that doubled as a gentle introduction to environmental responsibility. The initial sketches had emerged during late nights between client projects, but gradually evolved into a complete manuscript with fully developed illustrations. I'd researched publishing options but hadn't taken the next step, fear holding me back from putting such a personal creation into the world. What if publishers rejected it? What if readers didn't connect with it? It was Eliza who finally pushed me forward during one of our now monthly lunch meetings. "You've been talking about Wonder Homes for months," she said, stealing one of my sweet potato fries. "What are you waiting for?" "The right time," I hedged. She fixed me with a knowing look. "There is no right time. There's just now, and later, and eventually never." That afternoon, I compiled submission packages for 12 carefully researched publishers who specialized in children's environmental education. I included the manuscript, sample illustrations, my professional background, and a marketing plan outlining potential audiences. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I sent them out. The waiting was excruciating. 1 week passed. 2, 3. Rejections started arriving. Polite, sometimes encouraging, but rejections nonetheless. "While your illustrations are beautiful, this project doesn't fit our current list. We've recently acquired a similar title and cannot take on competing projects. Your concept has merit, but we're not taking on new authors at this time." By the 6th rejection, my confidence wavered. By the 8th, I questioned the entire project. By the 10th, I considered abandoning it entirely. Then, on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday morning, I received a call from Horizon Books, a respected publisher of children's educational content. "Is this Olivia Chen, the illustrator?" The voice belonged to Catherine Walker, a senior editor whose name I recognized from industry publications. "Yes, that's me," I managed, heart suddenly racing. "I'm calling about your Wonder Homes submission. We're very interested in discussing publication. Are you free for a meeting this week?" The meeting turned into a contract offer. The contract turned into a publication date. The single book concept expanded into a potential series. "Your timing is perfect," Catherine explained during our second meeting. "Environmental education for young children is a growing market, and your approach, making it wonder-driven rather than fear-based, fills a specific need." Catherine's guidance transformed Wonder Homes from a personal project into a market-ready product. Her editorial suggestions tightened the narrative. Her marketing insights helped position the book for both schools and parents. Her experience navigated the production challenges I couldn't have anticipated. 9 months after that fateful family dinner, where my father had declared I would always be poor, I signed a contract for my first authored book, with an advance that exceeded my entire previous year's income. I wanted to call my parents immediately, to prove them wrong, to force acknowledgement of my success. But something held me back. This victory wasn't about them. It was about me, about choosing a path with integrity and making it work through persistence and adaptability. Instead, I called Eliza, who screamed with genuine joy and insisted on taking me out to celebrate. Over champagne at a restaurant I could never have afforded months earlier, she raised her glass. To proving them all wrong? I clinked my glass, against hers, but shook my head. Not to proving them wrong, to proving myself right. The distinction felt important. My goal wasn't vindication through others' recognition. It was validation through my own achievement. The months surrounding Wonder Homes publication were a blur of activity. Marketing coordination, school visit scheduling, media interview, preparation. I hired a part-time assistant, Taylor, a graphic design student who managed my administrative tasks and online store, freeing me to focus on creative work and business development. Sales started strong and grew steadily. Wonder Homes wasn't a blockbuster, but it was a solid performer that found its audience among environmentally conscious parents and progressive elementary schools. The financial stability transformed both my work and life. I moved from my tiny apartment to a proper one-bedroom with an actual office space. I invested in professional development, workshops on advanced illustration techniques, business courses for creative entrepreneurs. I even began setting aside money for retirement, something that had seemed laughably unrealistic a year earlier. But the most significant change wasn't financial. It was psychological. I no longer questioned whether my career choice was viable. I no longer felt the need to defend my path. I had proof, tangible, measurable proof, that meaningful creative work could also be sustainable. This newfound confidence was immediately apparent in my client interactions. I raised my rates. I established clearer boundaries around project, scope, and revisions. I became selective about which commissions I accepted, prioritizing work that aligned with my values and growth goals. Some clients balked at these changes. A few walked away. But most adjusted, and those who couldn't were replaced by new clients who respected professional standards. By the time the Green Sprout series was complete, I had established 3 distinct revenue streams: commissioned illustration work for environmental organizations and publishers, book royalties from Wonder Homes, and the now contracted sequel, and passive income from digital products in my online store. None of these streams alone would have supported me comfortably. Together, they created stability that surpassed what many traditional jobs could offer. The irony wasn't lost on me. The career my family had dismissed as financially precarious had proven more resilient than conventional employment. When an economic downturn hit, and friends in corporate jobs faced layoffs and hiring freezes, my diversified income sources provided a buffer that many envied. A year after that painful family dinner, I received an unexpected call from my sister Natalie. "Liv, do you have time to talk?" Her voice carried an unusual hesitancy. "Sure, what's up?" A pause. "It's about career stuff, actually." I'm thinking about making a change. Natalie, the peacemaker, the practical one who had chosen pharmaceutical sales over research because it was safer, wanted my advice. The conversation that followed revealed frustrations she'd never shared, the empty feeling of selling products she didn't believe in, the mounting pressure to meet ever-increasing quotas, the growing disconnect between her values and daily work. "I've been watching you this past year," she admitted. "How you built something meaningful from scratch. How much happier you seem now, even though it was really hard at first." "It's different for everyone, Nat," I cautioned. "What worked for me might not work for you." "I know. But you showed me it's possible to choose a different path. That security isn't just about following the safe route." Over the following weeks, we had many similar conversations. I helped Natalie explore options that combined her scientific background with her interpersonal skills. I shared resources about transitioning careers, building professional resilience, and finding meaningful work. 3 months later, she accepted a position with a medical education company, taking a pay cut but gaining purpose and flexibility that aligned better with her values and family priorities. "Mom and Dad think I'm crazy," she confided after accepting the offer. "Dad, especially. He doesn't understand voluntarily walking away from a sure thing." "Are you having doubts?" I asked. "No," she said with surprising firmness. "For the first time in years, I'm absolutely certain I'm making the right choice." Her certainty was a gift, validation that my own journey had impact beyond my personal success. I had unknowingly created a model for someone else to follow, proving not just that alternative paths were possible, but providing a roadmap for navigating them. As my business continued growing, I began receiving invitations to speak at design schools and creative business conferences. At first, I hesitated, doubtful I had wisdom worth sharing. But the questions from students and emerging illustrators reminded me how much I'd learned through trial and error, how valuable those hard-won insights might be to others. I developed a presentation called Building a Purpose-Driven Creative Career that shared both practical business strategies and philosophical approaches to aligning creative work with personal values. The talks resonated, particularly with young artists struggling to envision sustainable paths in creative fields. After one university presentation, a student approached me with tears in her eyes. "My parents said exactly what yours did, that art isn't a real career, that I'd always struggle. Hearing your story makes me believe I can prove them wrong too." Her words hit me hard. I was becoming the example I had desperately needed when starting out, proof that dedication to craft combined with business acumen could create not just survival but thriving. That responsibility changed how I approached my public presence. I became more transparent about both successes and failures. I openly discussed finances, pricing strategies, and contract negotiations, topics often shrouded in secrecy that perpetuated struggling artist stereotypes. In online interviews and podcast appearances, I emphasized that creative success wasn't about inborn talent or lucky breaks. It was about persistent improvement, strategic pivoting, and building multiple income streams. It was about treating creativity as both art and business without diminishing either aspect. This growing public platform brought unexpected opportunities. A major art supply manufacturer invited me to design a signature line of eco-friendly drawing tools. A university press commissioned an illustrated textbook on environmental education. A documentary filmmaker featured my process in a series about sustainable creative careers. Each opportunity expanded my reach and influence while reinforcing the business I'd built. Each validated the path I'd chosen despite those early dismissals. 18 months after beginning my independent career, I received an email from a surprising source, my father's hospital colleague, Dr. Sandra Park. "I hope you don't mind me contacting you," she wrote. "Your father mentioned your work in children's environmental education, and it connects perfectly with a project our pediatric department is developing. We're creating a series of materials to help children understand and cope with climate anxiety. Would you be interested in discussing a potential collaboration?" The message stunned me. Not just the opportunity itself, which aligned perfectly with my core mission, but the implication that my father had spoken about my work positively enough for a colleague to reach out. I agreed to a meeting, curious about both the project and the connection. Dr. Park greeted me warmly in the hospital's administrative wing. "Thank you for coming in. Your father speaks very highly of your illustration work." I couldn't hide my surprise. "He does?" She nodded, seemingly unaware of the complexity behind my question. "He showed me your book at a department lunch. Said his daughter was making environmental education accessible to children. He seemed quite proud." The revelation disoriented me. My father? Proud? The same man who had dismissed my career choice as guaranteed poverty? Who had predicted inevitable failure? As Dr. Park outlined the project, a series of illustrated materials helping children process climate concerns in healthy ways, I participated professionally while internally processing this shift. Had my father's attitude genuinely changed? Or was he simply saving face with colleagues? The project itself was perfect for me. Meaningful, impactful work using my specific expertise to address a growing need. The budget was substantial, reflecting both the project's importance and my established market value. I accepted the commission, compartmentalizing my personal confusion to focus on the professional opportunity. That evening, I sat in my office long after completing the day's work, contemplating how much had changed in 18 months. From desperate determination in a tiny apartment to established success in a field my family had dismissed as non-viable. The journey hadn't been simple or straightforward. It had required constant adaptation, strategic pivoting, and relentless persistence. It had demanded growth not just as an artist, but as an entrepreneur, communicator, and business strategist. But the results were undeniable. Financial stability, creative fulfillment, growing influence, and perhaps most surprisingly, the beginning of recognition from the very people who had most doubted my path. The next phase of my journey was crystallizing before me, expanding from individual success to broader impact, using my platform to change perceptions about creative careers, building systems that helped other artists find sustainable paths, creating work that addressed meaningful problems while providing a viable livelihood. It wasn't about proving my family wrong anymore. It was about proving that the entire paradigm was wrong. The false dichotomy between meaningful work and financial stability, between creative fulfillment and practical success. As I reviewed contracts for upcoming projects and finalized illustrations for Wonder Homes 2, I realized how far I had come from that painful family dinner. Not just in tangible success, but in understanding what truly mattered. I hadn't just built a career. I had built proof of concept for a different way of working, one that integrated purpose and practicality, creativity and business acumen, personal fulfillment and financial sustainability. That proof was becoming my most important creation of all. My career continued its upward trajectory with a momentum that sometimes left me breathless. 2 years after that fateful family dinner, Wonder Homes had expanded into a 4-book series, each focused on different habitats and environmental themes. My illustration work for environmental organizations had grown from occasional commissions to ongoing partnerships. My online store now employed 2 part-time staff to manage fulfillment and customer service. But perhaps the most unexpected development was how my relationship with my family had evolved. The hospital project with Dr. Park had opened a narrow channel of communication with my father. He never directly acknowledged his earlier dismissal of my career, but his attitude had shifted from outright skepticism to a tentative respect. One Sunday afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Olivia Chen, the illustrator?" The woman's voice was professional, clipped. "Yes, this is she." "My name is Rebecca Winters. I'm the Director of Corporate Giving at Meridian Healthcare. Your father suggested I contact you about a potential project." I nearly dropped my phone. My father had referred a client to me? "I see," I managed. "What kind of project?" "We're developing a children's wellness initiative for underserved communities. The program needs engaging materials about nutrition, exercise, and preventative health. Dr. Chen mentioned your work makes complex topics accessible to young audiences." The project was substantial, a series of illustrated educational booklets, posters, and digital assets for a program being implemented in community centers across 3 states. The budget reflected its scale. After the call, I sat in stunned silence. My father hadn't just mentioned my work in passing. He had actively advocated for me, using his professional connections to create an opportunity. I wanted to call him immediately to acknowledge this gesture. But our communication remained awkward, weighted with unspoken history. Instead, I texted him. "Just spoke with Rebecca Winters. Thank you for the referral." His response came hours later. "Your work is well suited for their needs." Not warm, not effusive. But from my father, it was significant. A professional endorsement when he had once predicted professional failure. The Meridian Healthcare Project marked a turning point in my business. Corporate social responsibility initiatives often had larger budgets than nonprofits or educational publishers. The work still aligned with my values, creating materials that would benefit children with limited access to health resources, but offered compensation that allowed further expansion. With the increased income, I made 2 significant investments: hiring a business manager to handle contracts, finances, and client relations, and leasing a small studio space separate from my apartment. The studio transformed my work life. Located in a converted warehouse shared by other creative professionals, it provided not just physical space for larger projects, but also community. My neighbors included photographers, web developers, textile designers, and a small production company, each offering different perspectives and potential collaborations. Diana, my new business manager, transformed the business side of my practice. With 15 years of experience managing creative professionals, she brought systems and strategies I hadn't considered. She restructured my pricing model, improved my contract language, and implemented proper accounting practices. "You've been leaving money on the table," she informed me bluntly after reviewing my previous contracts, "and taking on unnecessary risk with your intellectual property terms." Under her guidance, I began licensing illustrations rather than selling them outright, retaining rights for future use. We implemented tiered pricing based on usage scope rather than flat project fees. We created package rates for clients needing multiple assets. These changes increased revenue without requiring more working hours, the definition of sustainable growth. As the business stabilized, I faced an unexpected challenge: maintaining creative passion while managing a growing enterprise. Administrative demands, client expectations, and team management consumed energy previously dedicated to artistic exploration. The question haunted me. Was I becoming what I had rebelled against, focused on financial metrics at the expense of meaning and purpose? The answer came from an unlikely source: my mother. We had begun meeting monthly for coffee, neutral territory where we carefully rebuilt our relationship. During one such meeting, I confessed my concerns about losing creative direction amid business growth. Mom was quiet for a moment, stirring her latte. I always wanted to write, not just articles or short stories, novels. This was news to me. Why didn't you? Life happened. Marriage, children, supporting your father's career. She shrugged. But also fear. Fear of failing, of not being good enough. So I chose the safer path, editing other people's words instead of writing my own. She looked directly at me. I don't regret my choices. I love you and your siblings. But I do regret the creative paths I didn't explore out of fear. What would you have written? I asked, realizing how little I knew about my mother's dreams. Historical fiction, stories of overlooked women in science and medicine, the wives and sisters who contributed to great discoveries but never received credit. The passion in her voice was unmistakable, a glimpse of the creative person submerged beneath decades of practical choices. It's not too late, I offered. She smiled sadly. Perhaps not. But my point is this. You did what I couldn't. You chose the uncertain creative path despite everyone telling you it was impractical. Don't abandon that courage now just because success brings different challenges. Her words stayed with me, reshaping my approach to business growth. Instead of seeing administrative and management responsibilities as creative distractions, I began viewing them as protections for creative space. I established new boundaries: 3 days each week dedicated to hands-on creation, 2 for business, management. I reserved mornings for deep creative work before opening emails or taking calls. I scheduled regular exploration days for artistic experimentation without commercial pressure. These structures preserved creative purpose while acknowledging business realities, a balance I hadn't imagined possible when first starting out. With this sustainable approach established, I expanded my focus to include mentoring. I developed a fellowship program that provided studio space, material stipends, and business coaching to 3 emerging environmental illustrators annually. I created affordable online courses sharing both technical skills and business strategies for creative professionals. These initiatives weren't just altruistic. They created a talent pipeline for larger projects and diversified revenue through course sales. But they also addressed a core problem I had faced: the lack of practical guidance for artists seeking sustainable careers. As my platform grew, so did interest from traditional media. Profiles in design magazines led to features in business publications. A segment on local television expanded to an interview with a national morning show about environmental education. Social media followers multiplied, creating both opportunities and pressures. The exposure was validating, but disorienting. In one particularly surreal moment, I overheard 2 strangers discussing wonder homes at a coffee shop, unaware that the author-illustrator was sitting nearby. "My daughter insists on reading it every night," one woman said. "She's completely obsessed with saving the rainforest now." My son's school uses the whole series in their science curriculum. The other replied. The teacher said it's the first time she's gotten full classroom engagement on environmental topics. Their conversation affected me more deeply than any formal review. Real children connecting with the work, carrying its messages into their developing worldviews. This was success beyond financial metrics or professional recognition. 3 years into my independent career, I received an email that would again shift my trajectory. Subject: Wonder Homes. Animation Development, the Why. Message was from Westlight Studios, an animation company known for high-quality educational content. They wanted to adapt Wonder Homes into an animated series for a major streaming platform, maintaining its educational core while expanding the narrative for episodic storytelling. The proposed deal was substantial, larger than any previous contract, with ongoing royalties if the series proceeded to production. It would require extensive collaboration, adaptability, and trust in other creatives to extend my vision. Diana advised immediate acceptance. This is what we've been building toward, she insisted. The opportunity to reach millions of children with your message. But the decision wasn't as straightforward as the numbers suggested. Animation development would mean less hands-on creative control, more meetings, more compromise. It would push my work further into the commercial mainstream while potentially diluting its educational intentions. I requested a week to consider the offer, seeking counsel from trusted advisors. My mentor from art school cautioned about creative compromises. My business manager emphasized the platform's reach. Fellow illustrators who had navigated similar transitions shared mixed experiences. The deciding factor came from an unexpected quarter. During a family dinner, now a monthly occurrence as relationships gradually mended, I mentioned the animation opportunity and my hesitations. James, who rarely commented on my career, looked up from his plate. You're worried about sacrificing integrity for commercial success? Essentially, yes. Remember when we were kids and you were obsessed with that environmental cartoon? The one with the talking animals fighting pollution? I smiled at the memory. Captain Earth. I watched it every Saturday morning. Exactly. And now you're creating books that teach the same values to today's kids? Imagine being able to reach them through animation too, meeting them where they already are. His perspective shifted something fundamental in my thinking. This wasn't about choosing between integrity and reach. It was about extending integrity through greater reach. I accepted Westlight's offer with specific conditions. I would serve as creative consultant throughout development. The educational content would remain scientifically accurate, and a percentage of proceeds would support environmental education in underserved communities. The animation development process was unlike anything in my previous experience. Collaborative, complex, and constantly evolving. I worked closely with screenwriters, character designers, educational consultants, and production executives to translate the book's essence into a different medium. My initial fears of creative compromise proved both warranted and manageable. Some battles I won, maintaining scientific accuracy, preserving core educational messages. Others I conceded, adding characters for narrative balance, incorporating more humor and adventure elements. The resulting development package earned a full series order, 12 episodes for the first season with options for expansion. The premiere was scheduled for 18 months later, an agonizing wait to see the final translation of my work. During this expansion of my professional reach, my family dynamics continued their gradual evolution. My father never directly apologized, for his dismissal of my career choice, but his actions spoke volumes. He displayed my books prominently in his office. He mentioned my projects in conversations with colleagues. He asked occasional questions about my business decisions. While attending a medical conference in my city, he asked to see my studio. The first time he had shown interest in visiting my professional space. Walking through the light-filled rooms where I created illustrations, managed my team, and developed new projects, his expression remained unreadable. "This is quite an operation," he finally said, surveying the design table where concept sketches for the animation were spread out. "It's grown beyond what I initially imagined," I admitted. He picked up a preliminary character design, studying it with clinical attention. "Your mother told me about the streaming deal. That's significant." "It's still in development. Many projects don't make it to final production." "But yours will," he said with unexpected certainty. "You've always, been methodical, thorough." Coming from my father, this was high praise, acknowledgement of qualities he valued, applied to work he had once dismissed. "The business aspects surprise me most," he continued, gesturing to the office area where Diana managed operations. "You've built a proper enterprise, not just art." There it was, the distinction that revealed his original misconception. He had equated creative careers with hobby-level pursuits, failing to recognize the legitimate business structures that supported successful creative professionals. "It is a business," I confirmed, "with revenue streams, growth strategies, and operational systems like any other." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." The visit marked another incremental step in our reconciliation, not through dramatic confrontation or explicit apology, but through demonstrated respect for what I had built. As preparation for the animation series intensified, a different family dynamic emerged with surprising force. My mother, inspired by our conversations about creative courage, had begun writing the historical novel she had deferred for decades. "It's probably terrible," she confessed when finally revealing her project, "but I'm doing it anyway. Your journey gave me permission to try." She joined a writing group, took online courses, and developed disciplined writing habits, approaching her creative exploration with the same methodical dedication she had once applied to supporting others' ambitions. Her enthusiasm was infectious, her determination inspiring. Our coffee meetings evolved into creative discussions where we shared insights from our respective projects. After decades of polite distance, we discovered genuine connection through creative practice. Natalie, too, had found her footing in her new career path. After the initial adjustment period, she had risen quickly within the medical education company, developing innovative programs that bridged clinical knowledge and patient communication. "I never would have made the jump without seeing you succeed," she reminded me during a sisterly lunch date. "You made the scary choice seem possible." James remained the most conventional family member, progressing steadily through the corporate medical world. But even he had incorporated small rebellions against our father's rigid path, pursuing global health initiatives alongside traditional practice, finding purpose beyond status and security. Our family was healing, not through dramatic confrontations or explicit apologies, but through demonstrated respect for different paths. We were becoming adults capable of seeing each other clearly, without the distorting lens of parental expectations or sibling rivalries. 4 years after that painful family dinner, I stood backstage at the National Environmental Education Conference, preparing to deliver the keynote address. My hands trembled slightly as I reviewed my notes. The journey from dismissed dreamer To industry leader had been neither straight nor simple. It had required constant adaptation, strategic pivoting, and persistent growth beyond my comfort zones. It had demanded evolving from solo practitioner to team leader, from creative freelancer to business owner, from passionate artist to strategic entrepreneur. As the introduction concluded and applause signaled my entrance, I took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. Looking out at the audience of educators, environmental advocates, and industry professionals, I spotted familiar faces in the reserved front row. My mother, beaming with pride. Natalie and James, who had rearranged work commitments to attend. And most surprisingly, my father, present despite his general aversion to public events, sitting straight-backed and attentive. "Thank you for that kind introduction," I began. 4 years ago, I sat at a family dinner being told that my career choice would guarantee a lifetime of poverty, that following my creative passion was incompatible with financial stability. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the audience. Many had heard similar warnings. Today, I want to talk about the false dichotomy between purpose and prosperity. The myth that meaningful work must come at the expense of practical success. For the next 40 minutes, I shared not just my personal journey but the broader principles it had revealed. How specialization creates market value, how multiple revenue streams build resilience, how core purpose drives sustainable growth, how authentic voice creates distinctive positioning. I discussed the business structures that supported creative work, the strategic decisions that expanded impact, and the mindset shifts that transformed obstacles into opportunities. The question isn't whether creative careers can be sustainable. I concluded. It's how we build the skills, systems, and strategies to make them so. It's how we expand our definition of success beyond financial metrics while still acknowledging financial realities. The standing ovation was gratifying, but the brief moment that followed meant more. My father standing alongside everyone else, applauding with uncharacteristic enthusiasm, his expression a complex mixture of pride and something that looked remarkably like respect. At the reception afterward, surrounded by conference attendees eager to connect, I watched my family interact with my professional community. My mother discussing her novel with a publishing contact, Natalie exchanging cards with an educational technology developer, James Deep, in conversation with a global health initiative representative. My father stood slightly apart, observing it all with his characteristic analytical gaze. When I finally made my way to him, he offered a glass of champagne from a passing tray. "Congratulations," he said simply. "That was a compelling presentation." "Thank you for coming," I replied. "I know these events aren't your preference." He considered his response carefully, as he always did. "I've been thinking about our conversation when you first told us about your illustration plans." The understated reference to his dismissal of my career hung between us. "I was wrong," he continued, the words clearly difficult for him. "Not just about the viability of your specific path, but about the framework I use to evaluate career choices." Coming. From my father, this was monumental. An explicit acknowledgement of conceptual error, not just factual mistake. I measured success through a narrow lens: predictable advancement, established prestige, financial guarantees. I didn't recognize other valid metrics. "Like what?" I prompted. "Like impact, fulfillment, adaptability." He gestured toward the room of professionals engaging with my work. Leadership in emerging fields. The acknowledgement wasn't just healing, it was validating in a way financial success alone had not been. My father had recognized not just that I had succeeded, despite choosing a creative path, but that the creative path itself offered legitimate forms of success he had failed to value. "Thank you for saying that," I said simply. He nodded once, our tacit understanding that the conversation need not continue. Some reconciliations happen through single profound moments, others through incremental shifts over time. Ours was firmly, in the latter category, a gradual reconstruction of respect built on demonstrated achievement rather than dramatic confrontation. As the evening concluded and we prepared to leave, my mother linked her arm through mine. "Your father has been telling his colleagues about wonder homes for months, you know. He's quite proud in his way." The revelation surprised me. "He has?" "He keeps a copy of each book in his office, shows them to patients with children." She smiled. "He'll never say it directly, but seeing you build something meaningful has affected him deeply." I glanced across the room where my father was engaged in conversation with the conference organizer, his posture formal but relaxed. "I didn't do it for his approval," I said quietly. "I know." She squeezed my arm. "That's why it means so much. You built your success on your own terms, not his. You proved not just that you could succeed, but that his entire framework for measuring success was incomplete." Her insight crystallized something I had felt but not articulated. My journey hadn't just proven my family wrong about my specific career prospects. It had challenged their entire paradigm for evaluating life choices, expanding their conception of what success could look like beyond traditional metrics. As we gathered for goodbyes, promises of future visits, and congratulations on the pending animation premiere, I felt the full circle of the journey. From dismissed dreamer to respected professional. From rejected path to validated choice. From isolated struggle to connected purpose. The true victory wasn't proving my family wrong about my financial prospects. It was demonstrating that purpose and prosperity could coexist, that meaningful work could create sustainable success, that following authentic passion could lead to greater impact than following prescribed paths. My father had said I would always be poor, but the prediction's true flaw wasn't about money. It was about possibility. The failure to recognize that innovation happens at the edges, that meaningful contribution often requires challenging conventions, that the most sustainable success comes from aligning work with purpose rather than separating the two. As I watched my family drive away, I felt not the vindication I had once imagined, but something more valuable. The knowledge that my journey had expanded their conception of possibility, just as it had expanded mine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, animation reviews, contract negotiations, team expansion decisions. But tonight, I allowed myself to acknowledge the distance traveled, not just professionally, but personally. From desperate determination to strategic growth, from defensive justification to confident purpose, from needing approval to offering inspiration. The greatest success wasn't what I had built externally, but who I had become through building it, someone who measured achievement through impact rather than validation, who found security and adaptability rather than conformity, who defined wealth through purpose rather than merely finances. That transformation was the true answer to my father's prediction. Not that I had avoided being poor, but that I had redefined what being rich really meant. The morning everything changed started like any other. I was in my studio reviewing animation storyboards for the Wonder Homes series when Diana burst through the door, her typically composed demeanor replaced by unusual agitation. "Olivia, you need to see this." She thrust her tablet toward me. "Your father just called. He's been trying to reach you." My stomach dropped. Dad rarely called during work hours, a boundary he respected since understanding the demands of my business. I glanced at my phone, discovering 3 missed calls. "What's wrong?" I asked, already reaching for my jacket. Diana pointed to the financial news site displayed on her tablet. The headline made my blood run cold. Meridian Healthcare stock plummets, 70% amid fraud allegations. Meridian, the healthcare conglomerate where my father had invested heavily after selling his private practice, the company that managed the hospital where he now worked as a department head. "Call him back right now," Diana urged. My father answered on the first ring. "Olivia." His voice was unnervingly steady, the forced calm he employed during crises. "Dad, I just saw the news about Meridian. Are you okay?" A heavy silence. "Not particularly, no." Another pause. "The allegations appear substantial. The CEO and CFO were arrested this morning. Trading has been suspended." I closed my eyes, processing the implications. "Your investment? Likely worthless." The clinical detachment in his tone couldn't mask the devastation beneath. But that's not the immediate concern. The hospital system may face operational disruptions. There are questions about whether staff will receive this month's paychecks. My father, the meticulous planner, the man who had structured his entire life around financial security, was facing the very instability he had warned me against. "I'm coming over," I said. "We'll figure this out." "That's not necessary. I'm coming, Dad. Family emergency." I ended the call before he could argue further. The drive to my parents' suburban home felt surreal. The practical roles we had occupied my entire life, the financially secure father and the supposedly precarious daughter, had suddenly, dramatically reversed. Mom opened the door before I could ring the bell, her face drawn with worry. "Thank goodness you're here," she whispered. "He's in his study. He hasn't moved for hours." I found my father seated at his desk, surrounded by financial statements and news printouts. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, the confident surgeon replaced by a vulnerable man confronting catastrophic loss. "This isn't necessary," he said without looking up. "I didn't call so you would rush over." "I know." I took the chair opposite his desk. "Tell me everything." Over the next hour, he methodically outlined the situation. After selling his practice to Meridian Healthcare 3 years prior, he had received both cash and company stock as compensation. The cash had purchased his hospital partnership position, while the stock, approximately 65% of his retirement savings, had been held as long-term investment. The practice sale was strategic, he explained. Healthcare was consolidating. Independent practices were becoming unsustainable. Joining Meridian offered security and resources smaller practices couldn't access. The bitter irony hung unspoken between us. He had chosen the supposedly secure corporate path over continued independence, exactly the kind of practical decision he had urged me to make with my career. "What about diversification?" I asked carefully. "I thought you always kept investments spread across different sectors." His jaw tightened. The stock options were compelling. The return projections significantly outperformed market averages. The company had 20 years of steady growth. In other words, he had violated his own conservative investment principles, seduced by the promise of exceptional returns. "What happens now?" I asked. "Investigation, litigation, possibly bankruptcy protection for the company." His clinical precision didn't mask the underlying anxiety. Best case scenario, stockholders might eventually recover pennies on the dollar. Worst case, nothing. I nodded, considering the implications beyond financial loss. And your position at the hospital? Uncertain. If Meridian declares bankruptcy, the hospital system could be sold, restructured, or closed. He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. At my age, finding equivalent position elsewhere would be challenging. At 63, my father was approaching the retirement he had meticulously planned for decades. Now that plan lay in ruins. What about immediate finances? Mom mentioned concerns about paychecks. The hospital administration assures us operations will continue and staff will be paid, he said. But contingency planning is prudent. Translation: he didn't believe those assurances. How long can you manage without income? He hesitated, unaccustomed to discussing his financial vulnerability. 6 months, comfortably. Perhaps 9 with significant adjustments. And the mortgage? Other major expenses? The mortgage is manageable short-term. We refinanced last year to take advantage of lower rates. His expression darkened. However, we made certain commitments based on projected resources that now appear unwise. Like what? Your mother's sister needed assistance with medical bills. We offered substantial help, assuming our resources would readily replenish. He adjusted papers on his desk, a nervous habit I'd rarely seen. We also committed to covering half of James's children's private school tuition after his wife's unexpected career change. The picture emerged clearly. My parents had extended their financial resources to help family members, confident in their own security. Now that security had vanished, leaving obligations they could no longer easily fulfill. We'll figure this out, I said with more confidence than I felt. First step is gathering accurate information. Let's make sure we understand exactly what assets remain unaffected and what immediate obligations need addressing. For the next 3 hours, we methodically reviewed his financial situation. My father, initially resistant to sharing such details, with his daughter, gradually yielded to the necessity. I took notes, asked questions, and outlined potential scenarios, approaching the problem with the same analytical thoroughness he had taught me. By evening, we had a clearer picture. The situation was serious, but not immediately catastrophic. They had sufficient liquid assets for essential expenses through the year. The house had substantial equity. His medical credentials remained valuable, even if his specific position became untenable. You have options, I concluded as we finished our assessment. Not ideal ones, but options nonetheless. He nodded slightly, the faintest acknowledgement of my analysis. Mom appeared at the study door. I've made dinner. You both need to eat. The meal was subdued, conversation focused on practical next steps rather than emotional implications. I outlined possible scenarios, from best case to worst, with contingency plans for each. My parents listened with matching expressions of strained attention. You're very good at this, Mom observed during a pause. The strategic thinking, the scenario planning. I've had practice, I replied. Building a business requires constant contingency planning. My father set down his fork. I didn't realize you'd developed such financial acumen. The comment hung between us. Recognition that he had fundamentally misunderstood not just the financial potential of my career, but the skills it had required and nurtured. Running a creative business means becoming intimately familiar with risk management, I said, Nothing is guaranteed. You learn to build resilience through multiple revenue streams and adaptive strategies. He absorbed this, nodding slowly. Principles I should have applied more rigorously myself. The admission that he had failed to follow the very financial wisdom he had preached clearly cost him. His identity had been built around prudent decision-making, careful risk assessment, and financial discipline. The Meridian disaster undermined that self-conception at its foundation. As the evening concluded, I prepared to leave, promising to return the following day with more information after consulting financial and legal advisors in my professional network. At the door, my father hesitated, then spoke with uncharacteristic vulnerability. Thank you for coming, for approaching this constructively. I understood what remained unsaid. His acknowledgement that I could have reacted with vindication or even satisfaction at this reversal of fortune. We're family, I replied simply. Driving home, the full weight of the situation settled over me. My father, the man who had dismissed my career choice as financially irresponsible, was now facing potential financial ruin because of what he had considered a safe, conventional path. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it brought no satisfaction. Instead, I felt an unexpected responsibility, not just to help my parents navigate this crisis, but to demonstrate the resilience and adaptability I had developed through my supposedly precarious career. Back in my apartment, I called Diana to brief her on the situation and adjust my schedule for the coming weeks. Then, I reached out to my financial advisor, my attorney, and several contacts with expertise in healthcare industry restructuring. By midnight, I had compiled a detailed briefing document outlining potential scenarios and response strategies for my parents. By 2 a.m., I had created a financial modeling spreadsheet estimating their needs under various outcomes. By dawn, I had drafted a preliminary proposal that I hesitated to share, but knew might become necessary. The following weeks brought increasing clarity about Meridian's collapse. The fraud investigation revealed systematic accounting manipulation spanning years, hidden debt, inflated revenue projections, and misappropriated funds. Criminal charges expanded beyond the CEO and CFO to include board members and senior executives. For Meridian employees and investors, the implications were devastating. The stock remained worthless. Hospital operations continued under court supervision, but with reduced staffing and compensation. My father's department head position was eliminated in restructuring, leaving him with a part-time clinical role at 40% of his previous salary. After 6 weeks of uncertainty, legal consults, and increasingly strained family finances, I invited my parents to dinner at my home, a rare reversal of our usual pattern. They arrived looking visibly worn, the stress of financial insecurity etching new lines in their faces. Mom attempted normalcy, complimenting my apartment's view and decor. Dad remained quieter, his attention caught by the framed posters from the Wonder Homes animation premiere displayed in my living room. Over dinner, I steered conversation toward practical matters, waiting until coffee before addressing the purpose of my invitation. I've been working on something I'd like to discuss with you, I began, retrieving a document folder from my desk. A potential solution to the current situation. My father's expression tightened with wariness. What kind of solution? I slid the folder across the table. I'd like to help, not temporarily, but structurally. The proposal inside outlined a comprehensive approach. I would provide a significant loan to stabilize their immediate finances. Additionally, I would establish a consulting arrangement through my company, engaging my father's medical expertise for educational content development, legitimate work with fair compensation that would supplement his reduced hospital income. My father reviewed the document with the careful attention he gave all contracts, his expression unreadable. Mom leaned over his shoulder, her eyes widening as she processed the figures. "Olivia, this is substantial," she said finally. "It's within my capacity," I assured her. "The business has been performing exceptionally well. The animation licensing deal alone provides significant resources." My father continued reading, turning pages with deliberate care. When he finally looked up, his expression held a complex mixture of emotions, pride and shame battling for dominance. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't need to say anything right now," I replied. "Review it carefully, discuss it privately. We can talk specifics when you're ready." He nodded, closing the folder with uncharacteristic hesitation. "You understand this is difficult for me." "I do," I acknowledged. "But difficulty doesn't change necessity." Later, as I walked them to their car, my father lingered while Mom moved ahead. "I never imagined this role reversal," he said quietly. "It's not a role reversal," I corrected gently. "It's family supporting family through changing circumstances, the same thing you've done for others." He absorbed this perspective, nodding slightly. "You've built something remarkable, Olivia. Something with resilience I clearly failed to achieve despite conventional wisdom." The acknowledgement felt like closure on our long-standing conflict, not through confrontation or vindication, but through demonstrated reality neither of us could deny. 2 days later, my father called. To accept the proposal with one condition: the arrangement would be formalized as a business investment rather than family assistance. He would provide genuine consulting services, and the loan would include proper interest and repayment terms. "I want this to be professionally structured," he insisted, "not charity." I agreed immediately, understanding his need to maintain dignity and purpose. Within a week, contracts were signed, funds transferred, and a new professional relationship established alongside our evolving personal one. The consulting arrangement proved unexpectedly valuable for both parties. My father's medical expertise enhanced the educational accuracy of my content, particularly for a new series focusing on human biology and health for young readers. His analytical perspective improved my business operations in unexpected ways. My creative approaches and digital strategies expanded his professional toolkit during a career transition he hadn't anticipated. Within months, this collaboration extended beyond financial necessity to genuine partnership. The doctor who had dismissed creative careers discovered new purpose applying his expertise in educational content creation. The artist who had rejected conventional paths found value in structured analytical approaches. Our Sunday family dinners transformed as well. Instead of tense encounters dominated by unspoken judgment, they became forums for genuine exchange. Parents sharing insights from their career transitions, my siblings and I offering perspectives from our diverse professional experiences. During one such dinner, almost a year after Meridian's collapse, my father raised his glass in an uncharacteristic toast. "To adaptability," he said simply, "the quality I undervalued most of my life." The acknowledgement sparked a broader conversation about career resilience in changing economies. James, who had once followed our father's path unquestioningly, admitted increasing uncertainty about traditional medical careers amid industry consolidation. The independent practice model is nearly extinct, he observed. Hospital systems are vulnerable to corporate mismanagement, as we've seen. Academic positions face funding challenges. The secure medical career I pursued doesn't exist as it once did. No career has guaranteed security anymore, Natalie added. My colleagues with 30 years at the same company were laid off with 2 weeks' notice during restructuring. Mom, who had started publishing personal essays about midlife reinvention, offered her perspective. The question isn't whether change will come, but how prepared you are to navigate it when it does. Exactly, I agreed. Resilience isn't about avoiding disruption. It's about building adaptive capacity to respond effectively when disruption inevitably occurs. My father, who had remained thoughtful throughout this exchange, finally spoke. I built my career on a fundamental misconception that following established paths guaranteed stability. I chose medicine partly for its perceived security, discouraged alternative choices for the same reason. He glanced at me. I was wrong. True security comes not from the path chosen, but from developing adaptable skills applicable across changing circumstances. The admission represented profound evolution in his thinking, recognition that his core assumptions about career security had been fundamentally flawed. The doctor who had once insisted reliable income required conventional choices now acknowledged that adaptive capacity mattered more than traditional credentials. My mother reached for his hand, her expression softening. We all did the best we could with what we understood at the time. True, he acknowledged. But understanding evolves. Wisdom requires recognizing when cherished assumptions no longer serve. This philosophical shift extended beyond career perspectives to broader values. My parents, who had structured their lives around accumulation and status markers, began exploring simpler living in their downsized circumstances. My father, who had once measured worth through income and professional standing, discovered fulfillment in contribution and connection. The financial disaster that had initially seemed catastrophic had catalyzed unexpected growth, not despite the disruption, but because of it. The collapse of external security had revealed more sustainable internal resources. 6 months later, I stood on stage at a university commencement, invited to deliver the address to graduating art students. Looking out at the sea of faces, talented, young creatives preparing to launch careers amid economic uncertainty, I recognized my responsibility to offer more than platitudes about following passion. When I began my illustration career, I told them, a family member warned me I would always be poor. That creative pursuits were financially irresponsible, that security required conventional paths. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Many had heard similar warnings. Years later, that same family member lost nearly everything when the supposedly secure corporate entity he trusted collapsed overnight. Meanwhile, my creative business thrived through multiple economic cycles. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I'm not telling this story to suggest creative careers guarantee financial success. They don't. Nor am I suggesting conventional paths guarantee failure. They don't either. What I've learned is that the old dichotomy between secure and risky careers fundamentally misunderstands how modern economic systems actually function. I outlined the principles that had built resilience in my business. Multiple revenue, streams rather than single-source dependency, transferable skills rather than narrowly defined expertise, value-based differentiation rather than commodity competition, purpose-driven innovation rather than status preservation. These principles apply regardless of industry or role, I emphasized. They represent adaptive strategies for navigating uncertainty rather than career-specific tactics. As I concluded the address, I shared the most important insight from my journey. True security doesn't come from choosing supposedly stable careers. It comes from developing anti-fragile systems, personal, professional, and financial approaches that don't merely withstand disruption, but actually grow stronger through it. The standing ovation that followed affirmed the message had resonated. As I left the stage, the dean grasped my hand. That wasn't just what they wanted to hear. It was what they needed to hear. Practical wisdom for navigating uncertainty. Later that evening, celebrating with my family at dinner, I received an unexpected text from a number I didn't recognize. Watched live stream of your commencement address. Powerful insights on career resilience. Would you consider discussing these principles for our upcoming leadership conference? Dr. Robert Chen, Memorial Healthcare System. My father had shared the live stream with his new colleagues at the hospital system where he had rebuilt his medical career in a different capacity, focusing on medical education rather than administration. His pride in my professional insights represented the final healing of our longest-standing conflict. 5 years after that painful family dinner when he declared I would always be poor, my father had become an advocate for the very principles he had once dismissed, not because I had proven him wrong about my specific path, but because economic disruption had proven both of us wrong about how security actually functions in contemporary careers. The following month, we appeared together at the Healthcare Leadership Conference, the struggling artist daughter and conventional doctor father now standing as equals, sharing complementary perspectives on building resilience amid industry transformation. My daughter and I approached career security from opposite directions, my father told the audience of medical professionals. I chose the supposedly stable path that proved vulnerable to catastrophic disruption. She chose the supposedly risky path that developed robust adaptive systems. He turned toward me, his expression reflecting genuine respect rather than reluctant acknowledgement. The question isn't whether you choose medicine or art, corporate employment or entrepreneurship. The question is whether you're building dependency on systems outside your control or developing adaptability that transcends specific circumstances. As we fielded questions together afterward, a young surgeon approached with confusion, evident in her expression. But surely medical careers are inherently more secure than artistic ones. The statistics clearly show. Statistics describe the past, I interjected gently. They don't predict individual futures in rapidly changing environments. My father nodded agreement. I once shared your certainty. The Meridian collapse shattered that illusion. No career path guarantees security when entire industries transform overnight. Then what should we do? The surgeon asked, genuine concern in her voice. My father and I exchanged glances, silently determining who should respond. He gestured, for me to continue. Build resilience through diversification, I advised. Develop skills transferable beyond your current role. Create value distinct from commodity services. Maintain financial margins that support adaptation when, not if, change arrives. And perhaps most importantly, my father added, recognize that meaningful contribution matters more than status preservation. When disruption comes, purpose sustains you through reinvention in ways that credentials cannot. The surgeon nodded slowly, absorbing perspectives clearly different from conventional medical career guidance. As she thanked us and moved away, my father turned to me with quiet acknowledgement. We're teaching what we've learned through experience, he observed. You through building something from nothing. Me through losing almost everything and starting again. Different paths to the same wisdom, I agreed. As we gathered our materials, preparing to leave the conference hall, my father paused, his expression reflective. I've been thinking about that dinner, the one where I said you'd always be poor. I nodded, remembering the pain of that dismissal. I was defining poverty solely through financial metrics, he continued. I couldn't see other forms of wealth, creative fulfillment, purposeful impact, adaptive capacity. And now? I prompted. Now I understand that true poverty isn't lack of money. It's dependency on systems you can't control combined with inability to adapt when those systems fail. He smiled slightly. By that definition, I was the one at risk of permanent poverty, not you. This insight represented the final resolution of our long conflict, not through proving him wrong about financial outcomes, but through expanding our shared understanding of what wealth and security actually mean in contemporary reality. The father who had once defined success through narrow conventional metrics now recognized broader forms of prosperity. The daughter who had once rejected tradition to pursue creative passion now appreciated structured approaches to building sustainable creative enterprises. We had traveled different paths to arrive at complementary wisdom. The conventional doctor learning creative resilience, the artistic daughter developing strategic discipline. Our reconciliation came not through one conceding to the other's worldview, but through both transcending limited perspectives to embrace more nuanced understanding. The family that had once fractured over career choices now stood unified by deeper principles. Adaptability over rigidity, purpose over status, resilience over dependency, contribution over accumulation. My father had predicted I would always be poor, pursuing an artistic career. In proving that prediction wrong, I discovered wealth transcending financial metrics, the prosperity of purposeful work, authentic expression, and continuous growth through challenges rather than comfort, through conformity. And in helping my family navigate their financial crisis, I demonstrated that true success isn't measured by avoiding setbacks, but by responding to them with grace, integrity, and collaborative problem-solving. The greatest wealth, we all discovered, wasn't protection from disruption, but transformation through it. The capacity to find opportunity in change, meaning in challenge, and connection through vulnerability. That understanding, not balance sheets or investment portfolios, represented the most valuable asset any of us would ever possess. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.